All right. Gaza War Day 402, Lebanon War Day 56. No end in sight, as usual. Don't believe anything you're hearing about a ceasefire. It's not real. Fighting in the West Bank in Jenin. The Israelis are invading Jenin again tonight, and there's fighting as I record this. Gaza, there's fighting in Jabalia. Saraya al-Quds reports hitting a Merkava tank with a TBG. And Qassam Brigade's report hitting a Merkava tank with a tandem rocket. So appropriate weapons, both on Merkava tanks. Israel admitted to 4 deaths in Gaza today. Israel is also bravely besieging civilians that are sheltering in Beit Hanun and various shelter sites in Beit Hanun. So that is the Israeli thing that they do, and they're doing their thing, and the resistance is doing their thing, attacking the Israelis in their tanks. On the Lebanon front, it's been an interesting day. The Hezbollah spokesman, Mohammed Afif, he's like the media spokesman, so not Naim Qassem, the Secretary General, but Mohammed Afif is a media person. He speaks at press conferences and things like that. And he was on fire today. He had some really strong words, and he said that we're prepared for a prolonged war with the occupation. And another really striking thing that he said was he said the the future is in your hands alone to the fighters. He may had a message to the Hezbollah fighters, and he said the future is in your hands alone. And perhaps the future of the whole Middle East, you will perhaps determine the fate of the Middle East, he said. And I thought that was a very striking quote, a very striking thing for him to say in terms of the message of these sit reps, which is that this issue will be decided on the battlefield. It's very clear that is Hezbollah's understanding. As far as what Israel's been doing on the front, oh, they've apparently destroyed 40,000 housing units in southern Lebanon, 25% of southern Lebanon buildings. And I imagine they will endeavor to raise that percentage even higher, since that is the most successful form of warfare that they know how to do. They attack from the air, but they also undercover with the tremendous air cover that they have. While they're laying down all this air fire and artillery fire, they infiltrate an engineering unit to wire up the houses to explode, and then they blow up the houses and leave. And once again, like 2000, there's lots of things that have changed since 2006 in terms of their approach to the war. But one thing that hasn't changed is that all their tanks, every tank that goes in seems to be destroyed. So the ability of Hezbollah to kill Israeli tanks remains unchanged. As the Israelis made all kinds of modifications to their tanks, but Hezbollah has made modifications to their anti-tanks. And in this particular arms race, the anti-tank side has the upper hand. This is not really what tanks are for, right? Whether it's driving up a mountain or parking in an urban area, neither of these are the use case for tanks. Tanks are supposed to be used to smash through fortifications, break through enemy lines in a tank battle in Kursk in Eastern Europe in 1942 or whatever it is. So there's always been a bit of a mismatch in terms of the urban and the mountain wars that Israel likes to fight. And then, of course, the fact that they mainly like to kill civilians and destroy civilian infrastructure. But the tank and the resistance in both Gaza and Lebanon seems to have understood the importance of anti-tank weaponry and the Gaza shoulder-launched anti-tank weapons and the IEDs, the Shoah and the roadside bombs that they plant, even in the West Bank, are all adaptations to the Israeli preference for using tanks. And the Hezbollah has laser guided and wire guided units that are bigger, and they can get them from place to place, and they can get them to where they need to be. Elijah Magnier likes to say that every operator of Hezbollah has 40 anti-tank missiles ready to go. So I don't know where Elijah Magnier says a lot of things. I don't know where he gets them, but he does like to say that a lot on his Twitter feed. And maybe he's right. I don't know. So Israel's gotten about 3 kilometers deep in their quest to destroy Hezbollah, demilitarize Hezbollah, create a buffer zone in South Lebanon, render northern occupied Palestine, i.e. northern Israel, safe from Hezbollah's rockets and missiles, so that they can continue their genocide in Gaza forever. So that's their going plan right now, is to that 5-point plan. And so far, 3 kilometers, destroyed 25% of the buildings, killed several dozen people in a terrorist attack using the Western supply chain, assassinated the Secretary General using 80 tons of bombs on a civilian area. And as far as silencing the missile threat from Hezbollah, wow, today was a day of missiles and drones from everywhere, mainly from Hezbollah, and lots of them. I don't know if it's the biggest day so far. Every day seems to be the biggest day so far, but 200 plus missiles targeting Israel's military industrial complex and bases, the Haifa naval base with attack drones. Apparently, there's a video I watched where Israeli soldiers are watching the rockets and they're saying, "Wow, we cleared this area. How is this happening?" And swearing. That's not all. The Iraqi resistance launched a series of drones. Usually if you're on the Resistance News Network Telegram or one of these other telegrams and you're just kind of scrolling through, this is how I get ready to do a sit rep, as I scroll through the Resistance Network. There's hundreds and hundreds of reports every day, and I try to make some sense of them for you and deliver this sit rep. And when you're scrolling through, there's always there's a report from the Iraqi resistance and their attack and their launch of drones. But today, as I was scrolling, it's like the Iraqi resistance launched a drone, the Iraqi resistance launched a drone, the Iraqi resistance launched a drone. Today was a lot. There was a lot of drones coming from Iraq to different targets, and they report that they hit their targets. And Yemen also said they launched one of their Palestine 2, their big ballistic missiles on Tel Aviv, and they hit their target. In terms of Yemen also announced that they have now 500,000 men that they've trained over the past year, and they're waiting for a land bridge. Now, this is interesting. I've shown this map before where I showed you how hard it is going to be for Yemen to get the land bridge that they need. But the longer the war goes on, the more things are up in the air. When Israel has spent the past 5 decades, since the 1970s, worrying about whether Egypt was going to go back to its post-colonial pattern of fighting Israel. And if Egypt were to go to that pattern, Israel would not last very long, because Egypt is so close and so much bigger than Israel, right? It's 80 million plus people. And so once Egypt gets on its feet and is no longer collaborating, that's the end for Israel's genocidal ambitions. Egypt can just tell them to stop and they'd have to stop. Now, that was not the case in the 60s and 70s, and when Anwar Sadat of Egypt decided that there was no way to oppose America, which is what he concluded in the early 1970s. And he put Egypt on this path of collaboration, which the current regime of President Sisi follows. But who knows? That the danger is always there that if the imperialists can't keep Egypt locked down, there's going to be big trouble for Israel. Syria is also they're not in the path of collaboration, but they are partially dismembered to this day and in a lot of difficulty because of the proxy war, civil war that was initiated against them in 2011 that rendered them unable to do a lot of the things that they had done in the previous decades in terms of standing up to Israel. Iraq is still occupied by the Americans, although the Iraqi resistance, operating somewhat independently of that whole situation, has been able to do a lot. And then Jordan is going to be loyal, I think, even to the detriment of their own interests. But there's always that fear that Jordan may also fall. And Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is currently conducting joint exercises with Iran, their old enemy. China, you may remember a few years back, brokered a historic deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and that has continued to bear fruit. It's continued to come to more and more fruition. And the conflict between Saudi Arabia and Yemen is still simmering, and the US tries to get it going. But instead of getting it going, instead of going back to fighting Yemen on behalf of the Americans, the Saudis have said, we don't want any part of this. When the Israelis went to bomb Iran, the Saudis said, no, we don't have anything to do with this. You will not fly over our airspace. They flew over Jordan. They flew over American occupied Jordan and American occupied Iraq. The Israelis did not fly over Saudi and get the Saudis in trouble with Iran. And now the Saudis are doing joint exercises with Iran. So we don't need, Israel needs a little bit more than Saudi Arabia to be completely selfish and capricious. If Saudi Arabia is completely selfish and capricious, they could easily go in the direction of Russia, China, Iran, and the BRICS bloc and trade in those local currencies, which they've started to do, and stop buying useless American weapons and stop that dollar recycling pump that people like Jonathan Nitzan have written about. They could move away from all of that, and that would be a major source of resources. One of the major pumps, I don't know how to put it besides a pump or engine of American power, which is slipping through their fingers like some kind of greasy substance. And who knows where that is going to lead to, because this was always an alliance of the crown prince and the monarchy, the Saudi monarchy, and the Americans from the Bitter Lake boat in Egypt where they made their secret deal. I guess I don't remember when it was, 30s, 40s. I think it was the 40s. And from that time, it's been very beneficial to the Americans. It's been the usual kind of colonial deal for the Saudis. They got fantastically wealthy, giving the Americans everything they need. They created one of the most artificial systems and economies and countries ever, entirely dependent on migrant workers from South Asia and other parts of Asia, with a gigantic royal family and citizens that receive massive subsidies and then go and do ISIS kinds of things and come back to Club Med kinds of situations. I mean, Saudi is something else. It's really something else. And it's out of this world. But they're not ideologically committed to America. And they do have survival instincts that are pretty strong. So that's worth watching. That's worth watching. When they were happy to genocide Yemen from 2015 on, but when Yemen started hitting their oil fields and oil facilities with drones and missiles and developed those capacities, they made peace real quick. And now they've made peace with Iran too. So all of which is to prepare you for the fact that if this war keeps going on for years, those 500,000 men that Yemen has trained could very well find their way to the battlefront. There are so many unthinkable things that have happened over the past 14 months that this is slowly thinkable. When the Yemenis unveiled the Palestine 2 missile, that was, a couple months. And then the Palestine missiles started regularly hitting Tel Aviv, along with the Jaffa drone. Now, over the course of this year, the Yemenis have been announcing the training of 100,000, 200,000, 3, 4, now 500,000 men that they've been training. And they've been training them in combat in training camps that are designed to look like Israeli settlements and basically the battlefield in Palestine. So this is not something you do idly. This is not something, they're not training these men to stand around doing nothing. And they're not training them as a deterrent either. So it's something to watch. Definitely something to watch. Speaking of Saudi Arabia, there is an Arab summit going on in Riyadh. And a couple of quotes. All of the Arab and Muslim states are there. Iran is there. Syrian president, Egyptian president, Jordanian king, the Gulf kings, all of those people are there. Some key quotes from the summit. Assad from Syria, he said, "What is the value of rights when Palestinians do not have the right to life? We possess the tools to stop the genocide and the massacres, and we are capable of implementing them if the entity does not comply with our demands. What is our actionable plan? Do we express anger or do we proceed with a boycott? Otherwise, we are complicit in the continuation of genocide. We are not dealing with a state in the legal sense of the word, but rather with a group of killers and criminals." So Assad speaking some sense and trying to berate the Arabs into using the immense potential and power that they have rather than continue on the collaborationist road. The other person who took the same tone was the Yemen president, Mahdi al-Mashhat. He said, "The minimum the summit can do is impose an economic blockade on the enemy, adopt a complete boycott, support the choice of Palestinian resistance, and open border crossings with neighboring Arab countries." That's for you, Egypt. Continuing complacency and Jordan, but Egypt is the key issue, of course. Continued complacency and disregard for the brutal crimes or waiting for solutions from those who are the primary supporters of the enemy will have severe consequences for everyone. Ain't that the truth? So that was what Yemen and Syria said at the summit, but like on the slow path in terms of bilateral relations, this is what I want to reiterate. There are things happening here. The Russia-Iran relationship is developing. Saudi-Iran are slowly finding some kind of common ground, including in military terms. China is behind it all, pushing for peace and kind of multilateralism, but their economic weight is there, and it's going to be made available at the right time. It's pretty clear to me. They're not. They're not. What can I say? They're not. They're being very diplomatic, and they're being very. They're pushing for a peaceful resolution, but they will be playing a role in reconstruction, and it won't be. They're not going to be messing around and sanctioning and participating in various kinds of blockades against the Palestinians. I don't think they have no real tradition of doing that, and they're not going to start over this. So America's the other thing to watch for in terms of like growing American participation in the war directly. The Americans bombed Syria. They 9 airstrikes, I think today. So Deir Ezzor, it's a major site in Syria, and they also have been bombing Yemen, Hodeidah, for 3 days in a row. Yemen's major port of Hodeidah. One of the observers, military observers that I watch on Twitter, goes by Sam, S-A-M, and that's a Syria army kind of observer, an observer of the Syrian army, writes in Arabic, Sam Syria 0. And they believe that the possibility of expanding the war to Syria is increasing. Incitement campaigns in the media are continuing. Threats from the enemy's army and leaders to Syria are continuing, and some are being translated into attacks. So the Israelis seem to be working up to, and with America, this is America's already occupying part of Syria. So this would be a real joint, probably more with most of the heavy lifting done by the Americans directly, operation against Syria. This is the operation they've always dreamed of doing, right? To try to destroy Syria. And Russia, the intervention of Iran, the intervention of Lebanon, the intervention of Russia have all precluded American destruction of Syria for the past decade and a half. But maybe America thinks they can get that done. Maybe America and Israel think they can get that done now. And finally kill Assad. Maybe they can do a big 80-ton bombing of Assad and try to kill Assad and do the kind of decapitation that they did with Hezbollah and start that general war with Syria that they've wanted to do since 2011. I think that'll bring them into conflict with Russia, but their new thing is not caring about consequences, right? This is the Israel they're trying to project to the world, that they're truly well and truly insane. So who knows? Maybe they figure the Russians will back off if they attack Syria. I doubt it. I doubt that the Russians would, because the Russians had invested a lot in Syria not falling to these various American proxies. So I don't know. Israel's also talking about expanding the operation in Lebanon, which makes sense to me. As I've said many times, they have multiple divisions stationed at the border. They've been trying to infiltrate. They've encountered some difficulty, but it makes sense that there would be Zionist military thinkers that figure that with a little more commitment, with a little more courage, and a little more chutzpah, they could go and occupy South Lebanon like they've been planning to all along. And so I expect they will. Once again, I declare that I continue to expect that they're going to try to go into Lebanon in a big way in the coming period, because the alternative to attacking, they can either attack, they can sit there, or they can withdraw. If they withdraw after what they've done, they are almost inviting the counterattack into northern Israel. And it that changes the whole dynamic of the war in a really, really dramatic way. That's a much later phase of the war, the phase when there are Arab armies operating on in various parts of occupied Palestine, the Yemen soldiers that I mentioned, Syria that will presumably want to retake their Golan Heights, the Lebanese Hezbollah moving into the Shaba farms, and also possibly the Galilee. So there are these are all things that could happen years from now if the war continues until then. I don't see them happening sooner than that, but that all depends on Israel and how much fight they have left in them, how much they can do, how much they can accomplish with those five divisions in northern Israel right now. I figure they're going to go in and occupy South Lebanon and then face higher levels of attrition and casualties and morale issues and logistical issues and struggles. But maybe they won't be able to accomplish that, and they'll just be attrited at the border to the point where they have to withdraw. And if that happens, there could well be a counterattack, and a counterattack not in the form of a raid, but in the form of taking some of that buffer zone by Hezbollah. Who knows? The Israeli Air Force, the Israeli American Air Force, would have to also be degraded to a significant degree for that to work, because otherwise they would just bomb, the Israelis could just bomb those areas to smithereens and make it really difficult for Hezbollah to stay there now. So things in the war would have to change a lot from the current situation. But it's all on the table, not now, but in the future of this, not in the future of a future war, but possibly in the future of this very war, depending on how long it goes on. In North Gaza, the Euromed wants to declare famine. The Euromed monitor, I think, of course, they should declare a famine. And there is a famine. The Israelis have been inducing a human-caused famine to try to, as part of the genocide they're committing. So I don't know who obviously benefits Israel to not declare famine, and there should be a famine declared. Now, I have a couple of things that I wanted to say about some of the analyses. I I told you guys in the last sit rep not to bother watching the Finkelstein-Magnier debate on India and global left. People were asking me about it, and I said I wouldn't recommend it, and I said I hadn't watched it. Well, I went and watched it. At first, as I was watching it, I thought it wasn't as bad as I feared it would be, and then it got worse and worse. And it was really quite bad at the end. And I don't know. I might talk about it in another video. It might just it might just cease to be important. I don't know. My main concern is that people like us might not be susceptible to the racist arguments that Israel makes. They might not be susceptible to the outright lies that America is putting out there. But they could be susceptible to defeatism and despair. And that's what I think Finkelstein is doing. And in some really, really nasty and insidious ways at various points. But I kind of feel like I've already said that. I might get into it in another video and I might not. I don't know. It's probably played out. But there are a couple of these analyses that I thought I would respond to at some point, but I don't think I'll do it tonight. For tonight, I will leave it where we are. And I'll save the other stuff for another video sometime. So in the meantime, please like and subscribe. Please hang in there. I will be back when there are more developments, and I will see you in the next video.